Those were the very last words of journalist Javier Valdez Cardenas captured during an interview.
Me levanto en las noches, estoy asomándome a la calle. He tenido que evitar con mi familia. No soy periodista del silencio. Quiero seguir viviendo, quiero seguir respirando. Morir sería dejar de...
Days later, he paid the ultimate price for being a journalist exposing various crimes of the Sinaloa drugs cartel in Mexico. But if you think Javier is the only journalist who was brutally murdered by the drug cartel, think again. These are 5 journalists who messed with the wrong gangs. Number 5, Rodolfo Rincon Tarachena. Many writers have been killed in Mexico for speaking out against drug gangs and trafficking. Rodolfo's tragic death adds his name to that long list. Rodolfo, on the other hand, was killed by Los Zetas, a drug gang that doesn't usually go after the media. 5 people thought to be members of Los Zetas took him hostage, abused, cut him up, and burned his body in Tabasco, Mexico, on January 20th, 2007. Because he worked as a writer and undercover crime reporter for a newspaper called Tasco Hoy, he was attacked so badly. Rodolfo got a lot of death threats from people they thought were drug dealers because of the honest news stories and pieces he wrote. At that time, the Zetas, a group that broke away from the Gulf Cartel, were active in Tabasco. It's important to know what this group is like because they are known for being cruel and violent, like killing people without a reason. Their masters turned them into one of the most violent drug gangs in Mexico after they left the Mexican army. In terms of where they operated, they were one of the biggest gangs, bigger than even the Sinaloa cartel. The Sinaloa gang and Los Zetas were both involved in illegal activities like drug dealing, murder, extortion, kidnapping, and more. As a result, it is clear that Rodolfo was working with dangerous people. Even though there were risks, he wrote about them without fear, and in the end, he paid the final price for his bravery. That same day, January 20th, 2007, Rodolfo called his wife from work to let her know that he would be home late that afternoon. It was clear, though, that he never came back that day. Rodolfo was writing a story about a group of bank robbers in the area who were using cash machines on Via OSA to get money from people who used them. Around 8 p.m., he left the office, and no one saw him again. The months went by, and by January, February, and March, there was still no word or clue about where Rodolfo was. Then, on March 1st, 2010, the government of Tabasco State held a news meeting to say that Rodolfo had been taken hostage and killed by 5 people who were thought to be members of Los Zetas. It was said that this was revenge for a piece he wrote the day before he was taken. Things took a strange turn, though, when a couple of suspects admitted to taking Rodolfo and killing him in horrible ways. They said that diesel fuel had been used to burn his body and the bodies of at least 4 other people who had not been identified. Interestingly, there was no proof to back up these claims, so the cops ended their search without doing anything else. This meant that Rodolfo's family and friends still had a lot of questions. They wondered if the cops didn't know what really happened to him and closed the case to avoid being questioned by the media. They wanted to know why the investigation was over without any proof to back up the suspect's statements. Was this a cover-up by the police, or were they afraid to interfere in this business because of the ruthlessness of Los Zetas? Unfortunately, we will never know. But till today, Rodolfo's family is still left behind with unanswered question about his death. It's safe to say that being a journalist or crime investigator in Mexico is a dangerous business. But the list of victims goes on. Number 4, Anabel Hernandez. In 2010, there were a lot of people who wanted Anabel dead because she wrote a book that exposed the illegal activities of the Sinaloa gang. The Mexican government, and some parts of the US government, all saw her book, and thus her, as a major threat. That is how she became one of the most wanted women in Mexico. Anabel had no choice but to leave the country with her family.
The most powerful men in the government want to kill me because I reveal in my book that he was in the payroll of the Sinaloa cartel.
Anabel was born in 1971, and as a child she wanted to be a lawyer. She saw how slanted Mexico's news stories were about the drug war, so she was unable to make this dream come true. Even though a lot of people were killed in different states, these stories didn't get enough attention because writers and editors didn't want to put their own lives at risk by covering them. Anabel was not like that, though. As a young woman of 21, she started her own newspaper called Reforma while she was still in school. A lot of people were interested in her first front-page story, which was about election theft in Mexico City. After 3 years, Annabelle got pregnant with her first kid, and her work was eventually looked at by the Mexican government. Annabelle was determined, even though she had to change jobs all the time because of rumors that the government was trying to censor her work. Still, her steadfast determination got her into a lot of problems. Annabelle's mother called her on the phone on December 5, 2000, to tell her that her father had not come home the night before. Because Annabelle and her family were worried, they started looking for him by calling nearby hospitals to see if he had been admitted. After that, they called a radio station to say that he and his car were lost. Soon after, someone called to say that they had found his car. When Annabelle's brother went to the given spot, he found a horrible scene. The car was parked by the side of the road, and Mr. Hernandez's bloody shoes were found in the trunk. His body was found on a highway outside of Mexico City as night fell. It was proven that the man had died, making him a victim of Annabelle's never-ending war against the whole drug world. The family was told by the cops that they would only look into the murder if they were paid to do so. It was clear that Annabelle had lost something by making the powerful angry, but she wasn't going to give up. Instead, she was out for payback. In 2001, Annabelle was working for a well-known newspaper in Mexico when she found a story about how Vicente Fox, who was running for president at the time, used public funds to heavily decorate his personal space, even though he had promised to cut back on spending during his campaign. The newspaper published spending records from President Fox's administration, which showed overcharges, purchases that couldn't be proven, and ties to companies that don't exist. This story was read all over the world, and Annabelle even won an award for it. She didn't stop there, though. She wrote a book in 2010 that went into great depth about how the drug gangs, El Chapo, the Mexican government, and the US were connected. The book was called Narco Land and Los Señores del Narco, and was the result of 5 years of hard study. The book says that Annabelle said the Mexican government, its policies, the military, and the whole banking sector are set up in a way that gives gangs power and makes drug trafficking possible. She then said that the relationship between the government and the gangs changed when President Vicente Fox put his support behind the Sinaloa cartel and let El Chapo Guzman get away from jail in 2001. To make things even worse, she said the DEA had a secret deal with drug dealers to bring fentanyl and methamphetamine into the US illegally. The trade made the DEA billions of dollars, she said. Annabelle was determined to take down the whole drug crime network, like a lone fighter. She had to deal with a lot of reaction, and the Mexican government even sent her several death threats. Genaro Garcia Luna, one of the cops she exposed, lied to the Mexican people by saying he would fight drug gangs. But it turned out he was just taking millions of dollars in bribes from the Sinaloa cartel. He even tried to kill her by sending his men to her house, but she wasn't there that day, so she was able to avoid dying. Annabelle was brave, but she still worried about her safety, which is what made her leave Mexico a few months later. Even with all of her work, Mexico still has a lot of graft, and the gangs still have power. She did, however, reach some of her goals.
I'm glad that I still be alive to be able to publish these stories, because I think that people deserve to know. People need to know what is happening there.
Number 3. Javier Valdez Cardenas. Javier was brutally attacked on May 15, 2017, in Culiacan, the capital of Sinaloa. He was shot 12 times by an unknown attacker. This terrible event put an end to decades of hard work he had done to reveal the Sinaloa cartel's crimes. Now comes the question, how did this horrible thing happen? Javier was born on April 14, 1967, in the city where he had a tragic death. He grew up in an area where crime was common. Crimes like trading in cocaine and methamphetamine, kidnappings, and trafficking of people were common in the area. However, Javier had the guts to face these problems head-on, while other teens would have felt helpless in this situation. After getting a degree in sociology from the Autonomous University of Sinaloa, he got a job as a reporter at Canal 3, the national TV station. At this point in time, Javier's journey took an interesting turn. Javier chose to do something about it himself because he wasn't happy with how well existing news stations were covering the activities of crime groups. He started his own newspaper, Rio Doce, because he wanted to learn more about how these crime groups worked. It was both good and bad for Cardenas that this book came out. On the one hand, he found some of the dirtiest and most important stories about organized crime, but this also made him an easy target for these thieves. In spite of this, he was determined to reveal them and wrote many books about drug crime, some of which were praised around the world. One very interesting book was Miss Narco, which looked into the lives of drug bosses' lovers and wives and showed how horribly wild their lives were when they were forced to be with them. In order to understand how bad things were for him, it's helpful to know that Felipe Calderón, the new president of Mexico, had just started his term and sent about 6,000 troops from the Mexican army to Michoacán and Sinaloa to fight crime. During this time, Mexico's fight against drug crime was at its worst. The streets were filled with blood, bullet holes, and dead bodies. More than 14,500 people died over the course of 3 years. Even though he didn't have any guns or security with him, Cardenas kept looking into the Sinaloa cartel's business and operations without fear until they attacked him. Unknown attackers threw a bomb into Rio Doce's buildings in September 2009, doing a lot of damage to the building. Luckily, no one got hurt in this situation. The attack happened because of a controversial piece that Cardenas wrote and put out less than 24 hours before. The subject of the story, Hitman Confession of an Assassin in Ciudad Juarez, made a lot of people very angry. It was surprising that Cardenas kept exposing people without getting attacked or having death threats made against him or his family. But in 2011, he made the Sinaloa gang angry again, which made them go after him. Cardenas was given the International Press Freedom Award by the Committee to Protect Journalists in New York because of how brave he was. In his victory speech, he spoke out against the violence in Mexico and blamed both the people who live there and the government for keeping the war going. It's no surprise that his speech made the Mexican government and the Sinaloa gang very angry. This only meant one thing: Cardenas's life was in danger. On May 15, 2017, Javier was attacked badly by a shooter who went unnamed and fired 12 shots at him. Around noon, this terrible thing happened just a few blocks from his office in Culiacan, Sinaloa. Even though the Mexican police worked hard, they couldn't find any link between the victim and anyone else. This meant that there were no suspects or leads in the case. When people heard that Javier had been killed, it shocked people all over Mexico and around the world. The UN, the EU, and the US Embassy in Mexico all spoke out against this horrible act. His wife, Griselda Triana, who was also a writer, and their young daughter were left behind when Javier died too soon. Still, his influence did not die with him. His newspaper was taken over by another news source, Forbidden Stories, which worked with the German newspaper Zeit Online to do so. So it's clear that Javier's important work and devotion to news will live on. Number 2, Gineth Bedoya Lima.
And speaking out on behalf of victims of sexual violence in Colombia, all women and girls are in your debt.
An award was given to Gineth Bedoya Lima for her brave work as an undercover reporter in Colombia. But there's another side to her story. She was kidnapped, raped, and beaten twice in 2000. The first event happened when Lima, who was 26 years old at the time, was working at the Bogotá daily newspaper with Ignacio, who was also an investigative reporter. Lima was working on an important story about the war in Colombia against terrorism and was looking into how state officials and the paramilitary group United Self-Defense Forces of Colombia were trading guns. As she was looking into the case, a killer known as the Baker asked her to meet him at the dreaded La Modelo jail near Bogotá. A reporter and a camera went with Lima to the jail, but when they got there, things became less clear. The shooter and editor left the scene for a short time while they waited for permission from jail officials to go inside. But when they got back, Lima was nowhere to be found. No one called for help. There were no signs of a fight, and no one was ready to come forward. Lima later said that she had been approached by a guy whose eye was scarred and whose shoes were shiny. While the jail guards looked on indifferently, He held a gun to her lower belly and led her out of the building through a different exit. Following this, an unknown group of men attacked her severely, both physically and sexually, while stating that their actions were meant to send a message to the Colombian media. They were mean when they dumped her body near a roadside dump when they were done. But by that same day's evening, a kind cab driver had found her and rushed her to the hospital right away. It seems like Lima would quit or run away like any other person would after being attacked so badly. But Lima wasn't like other cities. She had put her whole heart and soul into her work, just like Vince Van Gogh did with his deep words, and in the process, she had lost her mind. Instead of giving up, she kept trying to find the truth. Unfortunately, her resolve got her taken again, and this time the people who did it were even worse than the first ones. In 2001, a year after the first event, Lima was hired by the Colombian newspaper El Tiempo to write about law enforcement issues, such as the ongoing war between the Colombian government, the rebel group FARC, and the armed forces. Before this, Lima had become famous all over the world in the US for how hard she worked at her job. This exposure helped protect her in some way, keeping her safe from more harm. She even got a letter from the head of the paramilitary troops telling her that she was safe. The FARC guerrilla chiefs had also told her the same things, but it was all a trick to get her into another trap. In August 2003, she went to the Paraguayan town of Puerto Elvira to report on how the town's 1,100 people had to make cocaine full-time after being taken over by FARC rebels and held for more than a year. When they got there, a boss of the FARC guerrilla ordered the people to be kidnapped and took their cameras, cell phones, and clothes. The boss also made it clear that the prisoners could not talk to each other or be given food. They were brave, though, and didn't follow these orders. They not only fed the boss, but they also tried to get help for him when they found out he was planning to kill. On another occasion, Lima came very close to dying. When told right away what was going on, a top FARC commander quickly freed her and apologized on behalf of the boss who had planned the kidnapping in the first place. Lima's name was well known in Colombia, and if she had been hurt, it would have caused worry in her own country, as well as interest from foreign groups. This helps explain why Lima is still alive today. Also, the fact that drug trade is going down in Colombia has helped her stay alive. Lima's outstanding work has earned her many awards and praise from around the world, confirming her position as Colombia's most famous journalist. Number 1. Enrique Quintanilla. Enrique's body was found outside of Chihuahua on August 9, 2006. He had been shot twice in the head and back, clearly killing him. He got this horrible end because he crossed paths with the infamous Juarez cartel. But the gang wasn't the only group that wanted him dead. Some people in the Mexican government also wanted him to die, and you would not believe why they were so cruel. When Enrique started his own reporting magazine called Dos Caras, Un Verdad in 2005, he became a target for both of these groups. He started this project, which translates to 2 sides, 1 truth, after working for 20 years as a crime writer and investigative reporter. His job was to give information about the people who were killing people and selling drugs in Chihuahua. Chihuahua was one of the most dangerous places in Mexico at that time, so you have to admire his guts. The Juarez cartel was run by Mexican government officials, but it had complete control over everything. Drug packages worth billions of dollars that were illegal were brought into the United States by the gang. At the same time, they were fighting a fierce war with the Sinaloa gang over who would control the borders. As a result, many people were killed inside and outside the city. A lot of dishonest Mexican police officers and government officials also lived in this area. One might wonder how they were able to sneak tons of cocaine across the line without getting caught. To keep these officials quiet, the gang skillfully put millions of dollars into their pockets. Anyone who dared to stand up to them would have a terrible end. In a way, Chihuahua was like modern-day Gotham City, and Quintanilla was Batman, trying to keep things in order. In this version, however, Batman died. Before these things happened, Quintanilla used his magazine to fight for justice, mostly when it came to problems involving crime. In response to the high murder rate in the state of Chihuahua and the killings carried out by rival drug gangs, the newspaper was known for criticizing the Mexican government. He also revealed dishonest government leaders, unsolved killings, and drug crime. Because of this, he was harassed more than once. But just a few days before he was killed, he made photos and papers public that showed detailed information about government leaders who were involved in the drug trade. The former governor of Chihuahua, Jose Reyes Baeza Terrazas, was even linked to these discoveries. Quintanilla died too soon on August 8, 2006, after this information came out. He wasn't seen coming home that night after leaving his job around 11 a.m. The next day, his family reported him missing, and the next day, Mexican police found his dead body dumped by the side of the road. The horrible signs of abuse, like gunshot wounds to the head and back from a .45 caliber pistol, painted a terrifying picture. The police thought it looked a lot like a way the Juarez cartel liked to kill people, but this idea was later shown to be false. Mexican news station TV Azteca got a tape from an unknown source on October 12, 2012. On the tape, there were two naked guys who looked like they had been tortured and admitted to killing Quintanilla. The people accused of killing were questioned by an unknown guy whose voice could be heard in the background of the video. The people were recognized as Leopoldo Rodriguez Garcia and Armando Duarte Escobedo. The two men, Garcia and Escobedo, both admitted to killing the man and said they did it because 3 drug lords connected to the Juarez cartel told them to. After a few weeks, another video showed up on the website for Mexican news El Diario de Chihuahua. Mario Angel Gonzalez, who is the brother of the Chihuahua State Attorney General, was bound and gagged in this tape. There were at least 5 masked shooters with assault weapons all around him. When Gonzalez was questioned, he finally admitted that his sister Patricia Gonzalez, who was State Attorney General, had given the order to kill Quintanilla and Armando Rodriguez Guardian, who were both reporters. Many people thought this was an attempt by the gang to get the real criminals to admit to their crimes. They thought the gang was trying to get them to take responsibility for the killings. On the other hand, the gang later showed proof that the real killers were guilty. The only thing that was wrong was that this proof was given 6 years after the man had died. That was also after one of his sons, Jonathan Perea Cardenas, was killed by a group of shooters in 2009.